payback period of building something, let's maybe a parking garage, because I assume that these same rates will apply.
I think that, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
So the question is, if I heard it correctly, Councilor Chairman, is that will this revenue increase better position the city relative to new facilities, new parking facilities? Is that correct, Councilor?
Yeah.
I don't think that is the motivation.
No, I didn't mean that. I would just.
I don't know that it would.
I didn't mean that. I was just saying that if we had these new regulations in place and that we were to bond something to build a parking garage, it obviously would have to have revenue to pay it back.
Right.
And these new rates would help us be able to afford, in other words, another place.
Well, these new rates, if they're applied to new facilities, for example, if new parking structures are constructed and the rates applied to those facilities, that yes, they will help to buy down debt. Existing parking right now, meters that the rates would be applied to will probably offset the cost of doing business, which would be the maintenance and other costs. But if we were to construct new parking decks, that would be a combination of tax increment financing as well as some additional meter revenue, which would be obviously enhanced by any increase. So yes, on that basis, yes.
Councilor Doyle, just a couple of general comments, and I applaud our parking director for all the work that he's been putting into this. I know it's been time consuming. On one of the issues as far as altering the hours, that completely makes sense. I completely would agree with that. But just a general comment, I really want to tread cautiously here. I realize there's been a lot of comments made that Keene's parking is a bargain, and it probably is. Sometimes taxpayers need a bargain. Sometimes they're hard to come by. But with that said, one of the issues that we're going to be facing shortly, and one of the things that businesses downtown are going to be facing shortly, is going to be direct competition from the Colony Mill in the center of Keene, both walking distance from downtown and both with quite a bit of free parking. Obviously that the developer that has purchased these properties is obviously going to be going ahead, great guns, and putting a lot of money into these properties. He didn't buy these properties to lose money. He's going to be obviously competing. Obviously these stores downtown are going to be competing with existing businesses downtown Keene. I don't think there's any secret that they've already tried to recruit businesses from downtown to go into the center of Keene and the Colony Mill. And once again, we're going to be competing with free parking. So as far as increased rates and increased penalties, I'm like I said, I'm not completely on board with that. I am going to tread cautiously on this. I'm not saying I'm completely against all of it. We do need revenues, so at least it's balanced. So we're taking in what we're expending. It might be maybe that we're expending too much, and we need to look at that particular issue. But once again, before we go ahead, I really want to tread cautiously, because this is one of those little things that really affect people and can really irritate people that shop downtown. And I really want to be careful that we don't push them to competing businesses.
Councilor Roberts. As Councilor Powell has said about being an enterprise fund, and if we just go look at the chart that you put up here, if we do nothing, if we keep everything the same as it is right now, over the next 7 years, we lose we go $1.4 million in the hole. And I don't know the technicality, but if this goes $1.4 million in the hole, where does the money come to make it up? Are we legally required to increase the rates, or are we going to have to use the taxpayers to fund the deficit? I don't know the answer to that.
City manager.
Well, it could easily become what they refer to as a doom loop, because what happens is we wouldn't have the money to put into the maintenance and the upkeep of the downtown and the parking structures to the extent necessary, which actually could actually work to the detriment of the downtown businesses even more so than free parking at the Colony Mill. So it is a delicate balance. I hope, based on the conversations we've had with the people, the new owners of the center of Keene and the Colony Mill, that they're not trying to raid the downtown, and that they recognize that there's a symbiotic relationship between the two entities, and that there'll be a connection through Gilboa Avenue that might actually even create a downtown avenue to those locations. So getting to your point, if you don't spend the money on the infrastructure now, it's got to come from someplace or it deteriorates. If it goes on the property tax rate, it means there's less money to spend for other things because there's only so much money that can come from the property taxes. The state is heavily dependent on property taxes. People don't like to pay them, they're very upset, and we know that, and we try to keep them at a minimum. That's why we have user fees.
Okay, just for clarification, we're discussing this is an informational report, and at most, all that we're going to accomplish this evening would be to direct staff to prepare an ordinance, and then we'll have the real discussion about tweaking it for how much and for what. This is an open discussion to the public, so if you'd like to join in, please introduce yourself once again.
Joe Mirza. Looking at your figures here, I wonder if you know that from 2008 to 2013, cost of living has gone up 6%. Okay, I looked at the numbers this morning. Your expenses here have gone up 26%, from 767 to 967 over that same time period. 6% versus 26%. Okay? Our superintendent of schools recently told us we have a decreasing tax base. We're also losing children in the schools over time. So I assume the population is going down. So here you have expenses going up at 26%, right? And your cost of living 6% and a decreasing population. Right? This doesn't make sense. It's the expenses that are the problem. And what Mr. Thornton said about, the fluctuation, those are small numbers, 70,000, 20,000, this is a $200,000 difference. Okay? So the problem here is, as Mr. Billy was pointing out, it is in the expenses, it's not in the revenues. And as Mr. Duffy pointed out, this is a tax. This is a tax on workers. It's a tax on people who go to the stores, right? It's a reason they don't go to the store. Right? It's, so I think it's a very bad idea to up the tickets, to up the. You also might think of this. You might have seen your finance people. You might have seen like Ben Bernanke. He talks about trying to keep inflation up these days, right? No longer inflation is the problem. They're trying to keep it up, right? There are deflationary forces here, and government doesn't seem to get it that they shouldn't be charging more and more each year. We have a school board, 6% over 5 years. They want to raise, if they got everything they wanted, they were going to get 6% this year. Right? This is a problem in Keene. The taxes are too high. The school taxes are high. The admittance high. Right? Taxes are too high here too. And this is a tax. This is more money you're trying to squeeze out of the public. Right? You shouldn't be doing this. This is the wrong thing to do.
Right, just for clarification, I had asked the question early on about that capital expenditure line, and the answer was it's keyed into repair projects.
Right, but the projects he talked about were small numbers. They didn't even make close to that 200,000. There were 20,000 one year, going out to 2007. There were 70,000 another year, and they went up and down. But here you have a steady increase over 5 years from 767 to 967. That's 26%, with decreasing population and only 6% inflation. So it's crazy. This is just government being greedy for revenue, and this is something we can't do if we want to sustain the community, whether it's the school or whether it's the city. We got to take less. All right? There's a problem. You're either hiring too many people, or you're paying them too much. You're giving them too big raises because the public at large is not getting those raises. Okay? And you have to help the community. You just can't. You got to hold the government's appetite down.
Thank you. Other public comments, questions? Committee?
Sure, I have a question for the director, the chairman of the parking commission. I noticed that there was also an idea attached. Garrett Ian, Leverett Street. I noticed that there was also a proposal attached to this parking rate increase, and I would speak against any increases, especially the drastic increase of the long-term lots as opposed to the short-term lots. But one of the things I found most concerning was a proposal that only quarters would be able to be used in the meters. Now, I wonder why only one particular type of coin would be selected, especially considering that if you look at the rate increases, they're all divisible by nickels. If it was 25 cents gets you 30 minutes, a nickel would get you 6 minutes. If 25 cents got you 20 minutes, a nickel would get you 4 minutes. So I don't see why there would be an intentional push to make it difficult for the people to be able to purchase time by only having one type of coin that they can use. It seems to me to be a deliberate attempt to make it more difficult for people to pay their meters, and so that they're less likely to pay, so they're more likely to get tickets. It requires you to carry quarters. I can't think of any business that tells you you have to pay in a particular type of denomination. That seems ridiculous. Even soda machines have change slots on them, so you can pay in $1 if it's only 75 cents. So I would strongly urge and say that the people are definitely against the idea that you would have to pay in quarters. Robin Hood of Keene and the Merry People would still be able to take care of everyone and pay with quarters, and we'd see about distributing more quarters to more people. But I don't see why this wouldn't affect Robin Hood, but it definitely would affect the people. So I would stand against this move to make it so you have to spend a quarter in order to buy time on a meter.
Thank you.
If I might clear that up. The intent of changing over is that we were going to do a minimum of 25 cents. It does not mean that we can't put nickels and dimes in. It just means that it would be a 25-cent minimum charge.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments from public or?
Oh, about that minimum charge. So if you had a dime, you could...
Yes, I recognize you again.
Okay. So if you put a dime in, I guess that would mean that you'd have to put 3 dimes in before any time would register?
Correct. That's a recommendation that you could put 2 dimes and a nickel in and get your 25 cents, and that's when it would register. That's correct.
Interesting.
Yes.
Good evening, James Cleveland, 173 Washington Street. I'd like to start off talking, I agree with Mr. Duffy. I think the most egregious thing about this whole proposal is the increase on the off-street parking. Just for comparison, the uncovered and the covered lots, they'll go up about 12% if you average the two. And if you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be a 1% increase a year. So even if you had increased it yearly. Now, for comparison, the on-street parking will go up 50%. So if you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be 4% a year. Now, the real problem, as I see it, is the off-street parking. So basically, the rate will go up 200%. If you broke that out over 13 years, that'd be a 15% increase per year. And I agree with Mr. Duffy that a lot of employees will be harmed by this increase. You know, there's people that work downtown, and those are the people who use that parking. Another thing I'd like to address, the 25-cent minimum requirement. So I think it's going to lead to frustration if you require 25 cents. So suppose someone wants to eat at Lindy's Diner and they only have 2 dimes. You know, they may get frustrated. They may think the meter's broken. They may put a nickel in and, oh, the meter's not working, so I'm not going to pay for it. Or I need to go get change from a business, so now I need to take the risk that I could get ticketed. So I think that that's a terrible idea, and it's going to lead to frustration from people. I don't see why. I mean, even if you do want to increase it, why would you want a minimum? Someone may want to park in Gilbo, run down to Corner News, and grab a snack. They don't want to buy 25 cents worth of parking. So I feel like you're limiting choice in that scenario, and you're also limiting the ability, you know, it's harder for people to pay and be in compliance with the ordinance. One thing I was curious about, the on-street rates, maybe that's more reasonable, as I mentioned, but to Mr. Randy's point, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name, but I think it would have an impact on the downtown businesses. I thought that was a great point that he made, that the center of Keene, is up and coming. There's a plan. There's an investor who wants to turn that property around, and it is going to compete with the downtown. And I guess to Mr. Murzov's point, I agree with him. There's not a problem with the revenue; it's a problem with cost. He mentioned there's a 26% increase over 6 years. Well, in the projected numbers, there's a 16% increase. So I mean that's a big number each year. It just keeps going up. One thing I was curious about, maybe you guys can comment. How did you guys figure the new revenue numbers? How did you arrive at that figure at the bottom?
Mr. Bratton?
Like you're talking about meter revenue?
Correct. And the other one.
And the other one? Okay, well, the meter revenue is we have a certain number of meters, on-street spaces and a certain number of off-street spaces. And it's about 2/3 to 1/3.
Okay.
And so we looked at our meter revenue, said, this is the allocation. This is the allocation between the two. Here are the costs to the cost of the parking people. It had suggested, well, we've got a few different scenarios. It just ran those numbers and projected the increase based on an average, sort of the weighted average of the last 40 years of what those revenues are up there.
Now, one thing I would caution, I think, and maybe it's debatable whether this would happen, if you don't factor in maybe even a slight decrease in demand from the increased rates.
We did that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess some other questions I had. What is the major driver of these increasing costs? I mean, what makes it keep going up year after year after year?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, well, okay, so we've got operating and capital rolled it into one here, which, at the time we were trying for simplicity, but maybe that wasn't a good idea. In looking at our operating costs, which are our parking enforcement and maintenance, our expenditures were $716,000 in 2008, and $805,000 in 2013. So there has been an increase in operating costs, but it's not that.
Could you read those numbers to me again?
$715 in 2008.
And that's the operational costs?
Operational costs, and $805 in 2013, and then there are ups and downs in the years in between. So,
Okay.
so it's gone up. What we do have is we've got increased capital costs. We in 2008 we put aside $5,000 a year for each of our parking decks. We now put aside $25,000 for each of our parking decks for larger repairs.
Okay.
And that may or may not be enough in the long run. The repairs for those facilities are expensive. We've also started some ad hoc repairs to the parking decks and also increases in the lot. So in the years we're looking at, what we had for our maintenance expenses were $51,600 in 2008, and then they changed, $30,000 in 2009, $98,000 in 2010, and then we've got $162 in 2013. So, a lot of our growth, the big bump up in that numbers is trying to get a handle on the maintenance and preserving our infrastructure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what percent is operations versus maintenance?
Well, I'm not very good at throwing those numbers right out. Let's say this, 161 in 2013 for the big maintenance, and 805 for our operations, which is, you know, routine maintenance like snow plowing, and you've got the calculator, maybe you can.
So it's like 20%.
Instead
In
of,
that year it was 20%, in any given year, it's not 20%.
instead of trying to do this
Right.
on the fly like
Right.
this is the only one who could do that. A number in that. I think it would be appropriate as we move forward, if you could break that out.
Sure.
Because I think that was my
Sure.
question early, was the gentleman over there, and it's your question
Still
about this.
13% on operations, okay? So it's still way more than 6%.
Okay, thank you. City manager.
These costs do not track CPI, and that's unfortunately a misnomer that many people have. They track the cost of energy, and the equipment replacement and equipment rates, as well as costs that get passed along relative to personnel, et cetera, by outside influences, for example, the state of New Hampshire retirement fund. So these costs can go up in manners that do not have any similarity to the CPI at all. I know that the average property taxpayer doesn't understand that. I don't know why they would. They look at their own expenses, they go to the grocery store, et cetera, they go to the gas pump, and they see the various costs that are being passed along to them. The city of Keene has other expenses, energy being primary, and employees being another, as well as the fact that these are aging infrastructure. As you can look at these parking decks, they're no longer brand new. The one behind City Hall has had to have the deck replaced every couple of years now relative to its overall continued operation. So, and unfortunately, it doesn't track CPI, it won't track CPI. It doesn't mean it's a waste of money. It's a decision that has to be made relative to keeping these facilities, and I think you're on the right track. We should come back, show you where the expenses have been going. I think that they'll answer most of these questions, and they'll be very helpful, I think, to getting at the reason why these costs go up. And remember, we've had good luck 2 times in a row. We've had 12 and 13 years between rate increases. There is some cost averaging there that also takes place on the front end to get the additional benefit on the back end of that period of time.
As I said before, this is like the intro for the main event, which will be when we're actually discussing the ordinance that will change the rates, and as we add here, subtract there, or we don't add any there. But I think that we need this information to settle our heads and to explain it better